Well, hi everyone. I'm John Retlin with my review of Dark Side of the Ring, The Assassination of Dino Bravo. This one was really sad. It really got to me in the last few minutes when the family was talking about not having Dino around. That was some pretty sad stuff. And the details surrounding his death, I mean, those are chilling. And the fact that the investigation is still ongoing, it's an open case. I mean, that's some 25, 27 years later, and it's still ongoing. I mean, that's just goddamn sad. I mean, for those that aren't familiar with Dino Bravo, he's a pretty goddamn big deal in Montreal. He was a really big star. Montreal's greatest athlete. He was seen as the Hulk Hogan of Montreal. There was a lot of buzz around him. And then he went to WWF, WWE now, and he had a run where he made a lot of money, but it's just you look at what he could have been, and Vince seeing him more as a character instead of like being an athlete that he could have built around. I mean, maybe not push to the top of the card, but it's just you see all the missed potential with Dino Bravo, and then how he turned to a life of crime. And this episode just encapsulates all of that while recognizing this is still an open case. So this this was pretty good. We get a lot of friends recounting stuff, and just going from like kind of the beginning, hitting the high points. He either loved you or he didn't. He was like the Hulk Hogan of Montreal. Claudia was the daughter of Dino Bravo. She offered some of the most chilling stuff, and I mean chilling in the sense that she was a young girl when her dad passed away. She was a very young girl, and just knowing how a daughter, a child would be able to, how a child would be able to grow up without a parent, how a parent meant, what a parent meant to them, but also how they, met such a tragic end. And finding out that stuff as you grow up, that could damage a kid. And she seems like she's a very fine young woman who has grown up right. Obviously, her mother did a great job raising her, and she has her dad's fighting spirit, but boy, she was easily the most chilling one. She talked about, she talked in the beginning about memories of her dad taking her into the locker room and meeting various wrestlers and stuff like that as a kid, all the shiny masks and gear and stuff like that. And then Diane Revest, I'm apologizing if I screw up any of these names. These are pretty simple. Some other ones, that's another story. His wife, they met when she was working at a bar. She was barely 19. They got together. The manager of the bar was a big fan of Dino Bravo. And they did fall for each other, and it was a good marriage, and Dino did take care of her. Patrice Laprade, if I mispronounce that, I apologize. Wrestling historian, started watching when he was 6 years old. We get international wrestling footage, wrestling in Montreal, and only for 1985. And I imagine there was other footage, but they wanted to use Dino like kind of at the peak of his career. And we had Tony Mule, not Mule, but Mule, and he was the promoter from 1971, 1986, and then Rick Martel, King Tonga, who later became Haku, the Rougeos, Andre, many others came through international wrestling. I mean, Rick Martel, he was pretty goddamn over there. Andre, especially a giant that spoke French, and Dino was at the top of the card. He was helping book. He was, he saw himself as the top guy. He could book himself, however, he wanted and book himself with the top people and draw big crowds. And you take a look at some of the history of international wrestling in Montreal, they did draw some big crowds. Now, things were starting to fracture at about this point, even though they were drawing, some big ratings on the Montreal TV syndication and otherwise. They were drawing big ratings and they were still drawing big crowds, but the wave of WWE was coming in and it was taking over. And I mean, yeah, it was hard to break into the Canadian market. That is why Vince McMahon got Calgary Stampede Wrestling, so he could get the TV there, and then he would talk to the Tunnies in Toronto, and a lot of stuff would happen. And Vince McMahon wanted to get into the Canadian market because you take a look at all the great Canadian fans up there, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of great Canadian wrestling fans. They love their Canadian wrestlers, and that's why they love Dino Bravo. That's why they love Bret Hart. That's why they love so many. Rick Martel, um, the Rougeos. They loved Archie the Stomper Golding. They loved him. They love so many other. They love Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper was born in Canada. They just love so many. There's Gino Brito. He was also a promoter of international wrestling. Started wrestling in 1961. I mean, obviously doesn't wrestle anymore. That would be a long career. But we get Jacques Rougeau, otherwise known as the Mountie. He's like, they say, hey, can you introduce yourself? You don't know who I am? I'm the Mountie. And it was funny. It's weird to see him with no hair, though. It's weird to see him with no hair. I mean, I say as somebody that doesn't have all that much hair, but looking at the Mountie and just seeing where he started and him, like when he was Jacques Rougeau and he was... And then he was the Mountie, and I love the Mountie. I love the character. The theme just worms its way into your head. It hits those nostalgia points for me. But he talks about Dino and how popular he was, and that Jacques saw the wave of WWE coming and made a move because they were offering people money, and he wanted a way to he was in a good position in international wrestling, but he saw it coming. He saw that WWE was going to be the way of the future. Whether it was the right way of the future or not, it was going to be the way to make the most money, even if it was just for a number of years. And Jacques actually did do pretty damn well there. I mean, I'd say he did pretty well. They begged him not to go. There was a match that was supposed to happen. It was supposed to be Dino Bravo versus Hulk Hogan in Montreal. Vince McMahon was worried that there was going to be that Dino was going to get cheered more than Hogan. That match got nixed. Dino was upset, still continuing international wrestling. And then things just fractured. Talents were leaving because they were getting big money contracts. They were getting more money than they could have possibly imagined. Even though they were making good money in a territory, in a city like Montreal for international wrestling, how could you turn down that much money? You couldn't. And eventually Dino had to swallow his pride and join WWE. And I think he was getting they said like $300,000 a year with incentives. He had close to $1 million a year. I mean, that's something right there. Now, Vince was offering a lot of goddamn money. And it was at least $300,000 annually. I don't know if I believe $1 million, but I could definitely believe about $600,000 because Vince would, for pay-per-view bonuses and merch and stuff like that, and just anything like, any advertising that they did, they would pass stuff on to the boys because there was so much money that WWE was making, especially in the 80s. Now, yes, by the early 90s, things were starting to taper off a bit, but they were still rolling quite a bit. And Dino just could not, he couldn't resist that money. He had to take care of his family. He had a wife, he had a daughter, and it showed how strong of a family man he was because, some guys might swallow their pride. Some guys might not. Dino was smart. He wanted to keep wrestling. He'd been wrestling for a number of years, been wrestling since 1970. This was his big chance to really make big money, even though he didn't want to go. And at first, things were fine. He talks about being paired with Jimmy Hart. And Jimmy Hart recounts being paired with Dino and how Dino was fun. Jimmy Hart, by the way, if he's not on somebody's Mount Rushmore of greatest wrestling managers of all time, I would like to talk to that person. Because to me, and this is just my personal opinion, just a little bit of a sidebar right here, it is Bobby Heenan, it is Jimmy Hart, it's Jim Cornette. I'll put Jim Cornette on there. And Freddie Blassie? Freddie Blassie, maybe? I'd put him in. Freddie Blassie or maybe Paul Bearer, but I'd say Freddie Blassie. I'd say those four right there. Or Sensational Share. No, I'm just kidding. But Jimmy Hart has to be on there. Jimmy Hart, Bobby Heenan, Cornette, in my opinion, and then you fill in the blank with number 4. Because Jimmy Hart made anybody seem like a big star. He had been so popular in Memphis and took enough of that energy and drive, was allowed to show enough of it in WWE, where he gave instant credibility to Dino Bravo, who was unfamiliar to a lot of the WWE audience, unless they also watch international wrestling. Like if they were in the areas, the northern areas where they could get the Montreal television and they could see this and they could just see the TV and they could all just enjoy, watching this incredibly strong man wrestle. It was great. Now, the thing is, a lot of people don't realize about Dino Bravo. He was not the bleach blonde guy that he was in WWE, at least in his later years. He was, dark haired and stuff like that. And he had to change his hair. He lived a lavish lifestyle because he was getting big money at a big house. He was turned into a bleach blonde Canadian strongman anti-American villain. And which is unfortunate because he wanted to be Canada's greatest hero. Canada's greatest hero. And the bleach blonde, he didn't really care for it. His wife said it looked like a mop on his hair or on his head. And one of the people, one of the interviewers asked Jacques Rougeau, "How would you describe Vince McMahon?" He's like, "Wow, that's a question I didn't expect." Vince would like to test the boys who stuck up to him, like test them, like see what they can deal with. Um, and he had difficulty translating to a U.S. audience his broken English, even though I could, I mean, I don't remember too many of his promos, but I remember even as a kid, I could understand what he was saying. I said, well, maybe I do remember saying, looking back like a little bit later, like maybe this guy shouldn't have talked, but he wasn't that bad. I mean, compared to some, he at least understood, he at least knew some English, so he could translate like that. And the whole point of having a manager, he did have Frenchie Martin a little bit later, so you got away from Jimmy Hart. And he didn't want to do jobs. His age was starting to catch up to him because he was in his later 30s. And then we talk about his end of his career at the end of '92. He basically left after April, May of '92 after a European tour because he'd put in 22 years in wrestling. His contract was done, and that was it. Like, okay, suddenly the money dries up. Well, he has connections to people in the mafia, the Montreal Mafia, and Andrea Seedlio, again, sorry, crime reporter in Montreal about mafia studies. The Catroni family, they were under the authority of the Sicilian family Rizzuto, which is a great noodle, by the way. I'm kidding. I'm sorry to any Italian people watching, but I just couldn't help it. But one of the Catronis, Vic, was Dino's uncle, I believe. So Dino was his nephew by marriage of some kind. It's complicated. I don't exactly understand it. But we have Claude Poirier. He was a crime reporter. Some of this was in French, by the way, obviously because Montreal. If you don't know, Montreal, pretty big French-speaking population there. I would imagine it's probably 80% French, 20% English. Somebody in Montreal could, in the Montreal area or familiar with it, could probably tell me, as I'm unfamiliar. But you have to pay a lot of attention to this because there's a lot of captions, subtitles for people there either speaking English but they have a heavy accent, or in the case of the wife and daughter, and and one of the reporters speaking French, which makes sense. It's their native language. But with this, you talk about Dino. He never had a criminal record, and he got into the alcohol and cigarette, smuggling. Especially like contraband cigarettes is basically what it was. He was a debt collector because he was a strong man. He had that imposing will. He had a temper. His wife was worried because of the new job that he had, but it was the only way he could keep up with his lifestyle. Instead of moving into another house cheaper and stuff like that, he wanted to keep up this lavish lifestyle. He felt that he owed it to his family, and also he got the taste of having that success. And it ended up costing him. Hockey got brought up, the Canadiens versus the Nordiques. If you know anything about the history of hockey, I don't even know that much. I know this. I know that's a fucking hell of a rivalry. That's a goddamn hell of a rivalry. Jacques talks about how Dino saved him in a bar fight, hit the guy's head onto a Corvette because he didn't buy into Dino being a strongman. Jacques got a call from Dino wanting to see him the next day. There are different stories, but 11 bullets in the body, 7 in the head. And then you hear other numbers from there. But if that isn't like a pretty violent end, I don't know what is. And there's other stuff here. And I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly. But that's a violent way to end. So why the hell did Dino die that way? The wife doesn't really want to talk too much about it. Understandable, because she kind of had to move on from this stuff. No wife, no significant other, nobody should have to endure seeing and hearing about somebody that they love going through something like that. Tony Mule says the wife, came in running with the daughter, says Dino's dead. It crushed him because he had known Dino for so long. He was sitting in his chair watching TV. There was no sign of a struggle. The door was unlocked. No sign of forced entry. The wife is at the funeral pointing fingers. Is that him? Is that him? Is that him? Who is it? I found out who his friends were, and I was just wondering who it was. They never found out who the hell the guy was. They never found out. The daughter brought a drawing of the family and put it on his tomb. This is where it got me. This is where I was like, oh, this is where the emotion's hitting. Anger, yes, but also sadness because a daughter not understanding what happened to her father. she knows that he's not supposed to be in a casket. She brings a drawing maybe to make him feel better, but doesn't understand why he's there. And it's very, very sad. Very, very goddamn sad. People were emotional because they thought it was so pure. Um, Details remain sketchy. More stuff was coming out eventually. 17 bullet casings for 2 different guns. There were 2 assassins. One that had to have known Dino because he knew his end was coming. And there's 50 grand in a case of contraband cigarettes were found, and in his house. Why were they found in his house? What is going on? And apparently natives were helping him smuggle cigarettes. This $5 carton, cheap ass cigarettes. Anything about Canada, they got some high prices on that shit. I'm not saying the U.S. don't have high prices on it, but you check out the cigarette prices in Canada, even back in 1993. Pretty certain that was a big deal. His friends knew. Rick Martel declined to be part of this, even though he knew Dino Bravo. But we have a 2007 interview piece where natives trusted Dino and only wanted to deal with him. They trusted him. Dino met with a guy that was dealing cocaine, and the guy says, "If you let me on your cig deal, I'll let you on the cocaine deal." Well, and the police manage to see Dino. They catch him in the act of something. They arrest the cocaine guy. There's a bit of a fight, and yep, because everybody, an arrest happens and stuff like that, and yeah, this all excels pretty goddamn quickly, and there are people pointing finger at people to say in interview pieces who they think did it. The natives, bikers, somebody. We have no idea who it is. Still don't know. Case is still open. Tony looks at pics. He sees that Dino, sees some memories of Dino and just wishes he was still there. The mom got rid of his gear and stuff, just wait for her to cope. Daughter totally understood. He had a career for 22 years. They, again, still don't know who did it. And the most emotional part was the daughter talking about she wishes her dad was there. She forgives him for making the bad choices towards the end of his life. Does not harbor any resentment to him, but just wishes he could have been there, especially to see his 2 grandkids. Her son looks so much like him. If that doesn't hit you, I don't know what to say. This was very goddamn emotional, and really, really goddamn frightening just to see what happened. You don't beat the mob life, it beats you. This was quite a good episode, though. It's just sad that they still don't know what happens. They still don't know what happened, but this is pretty good. I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments. Excuse me. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Retlin. I'll see you soon.